Hello, world singers. My name is Tyler.
And my name is Brooke.
And this is Cosmere Conversations. How is it going, everyone? We are back with another episode. This one, completely fan-generated or fan-inspired. Just the fans wanted it, so now we're doing it. Taravangian himself.
Yeah, we got basically an avalanche of comments after our last episode saying that everyone would love to hear an episode about Taravangian and the diagram. So here we are to give the fans what they wanted. I was surprised that we hadn't already podcasted about it.
We went deep into Taravangian and the diagram in one of our Oathbringer episodes, but it was only a small chunk of that episode.
Right.
And we tried to dive in real quick and then get right back out. But this whole episode, we are looking at Mr. T, Dr. T, the Big T, however you want to nickname Taravangian, and his diagram. Let's kind of just go right from the beginning, Brooke. What's our quick synopsis of Taravangian?
Taravangian begins as the king of Kharbranth and quickly expands his title to include Yakaved.
And we're first really introduced to Taravangian through the eyes of Yasna and Shallan when they are visiting Kharbranth, and the interaction that we see of Taravangian is kind of a maybe older and not as brutal dictator.
He's like a kindly grandfatherly man is the way he's described.
He's set up all of these hospitals to aid the nearby war that he was trying to keep his people out of, but they had all of the medical teams and kind of had sounded like battlefield nurses and stations set up, which was,
I think Kharbranth is just the center of medical learning,
knowledge.
Yeah, the school that Kaladin's dad wants to send him to. Is in Kharbranth.
For sure.
That's just kind of the trade of the town, so to speak. Plus, they have the gigantic library where Yasna and Shallan spend a lot of their time. So it's this place of learning and kindness while they give this medical care to everybody.
Yeah, and Taravangian seems pretty cool. I mean, he wants to help his family member, his niece or something that gets trapped.
Yeah, his
early
granddaughter.
On. Yeah, and the kind of development of Taravangian over the 3 stories that we have so far is incredible.
If you think about it, I am literally just realizing this. He is very similar to Odium in the fact that they both have these elderly, kindly grandfather appearances, and then you look a little bit deeper and then they're sinister.
Yeah, that's kind of mimicking that royal mystique.
But also unassuming.
Exactly.
Someone you wouldn't suspect of being
who they
dangerous.
Are. Yeah, exactly. I think that there is such a development, and this is what I said last episode, but the idea of Brandon Sanderson as a mystery writer who instead decided to write fantasy. Taravangian is a great character that is just shrouded in mystery. We only get bits and pieces of his story.
We get a lot more in Oathbringer.
Of course, until Oathbringer. But the first 2 books, he is the fascinating part that you just want more of, that you cannot get enough of. Oh my God, this interlude with Taravangian.
You can't just drop this little, 3-page thing and then go away. What? I need to know what's happening with this dude.
Yeah, and Brandon sitting there just the mastermind above it all, just yes.
In time.
And we see that, of course, by the end of Oathbringer, he is maybe our central figure of badness. I mean, we don't have Sadius anymore. We don't have characters that are, the Parshendi in the first. You don't have opposing characters.
And
unless
Zeth is more empathetic now.
Exactly. So Taravangian is kind of the stand-in for Odium.
But like we were talking about last time, I think he is painted in a very 3D way so that, I think it's hard to just say like, oh, he's an evil person, because he truly believes that he is like doing the right thing.
Let's take us from that beginning to that end, piece by piece, and kind of pull out the most interesting things that we found about Taravangian through these 3 episodes, and then kind of, hypothesize randomly about what could happen in the future. Does that sound like a good idea?
Yeah. So one of his defining characteristics, as I was just saying, is he's really driven by trying to do the right thing, not just for himself, not just for his people, but for all of humanity. So he has this very like grandiose mission to save humanity, and yet his way of approaching that idea is very practical and detached. And I think a great thing to illustrate this is his description of how to decide. So he like proposes this parable, sort of, that if you are unsure which 3 out of 4 men are guilty of murder, so there's one person who's innocent, and you have to figure out which person that is, the best thing that you can do is to kill all of them, even the innocent one, so that you are 100% sure that there will not be any murder in the future.
It is a character that kind of tries to, I think, present a very utilitarian mentality or philosophy onto life. Even his acts of seeming kindness, like, for example, the creation of this big medical industry, is more about finding people who are on the verge of death and are capable of having...
he kills them.
Well, that's what I'm getting to. It is that the whole medical industry is just kind of pushing towards the discovery of these death rattles, and he will even kill people who are, just on the edges of society and kind of like not necessarily sick or deathly ill,
just
but
like no one will miss them.
Exactly.
He just brings them in and drains away their blood so that they just slowly die. It's so gruesome.
And in those long deaths that these people have, they occasionally have the death rattles, which is, we now know by Oathbringer, most likely one of the not even most likely, but it is one of the unmade that is geographically based. It moves around, and so it was centered on Kharbranth, and by the end of Oathbringer, we know
it's not there anymore.
Yeah, we think it's in the hills of the Horneater Peaks or near that area. So we have Taravangian, who can seemingly give forward this false identity or this false portrayal, because he has a very utilitarian philosophy, and it's all about saving some segment of the human species. Like, his field of vision is so tight and so focused on that one goal. That's his goal. Save as many people as he can. And the means in which he goes to accomplish that is crazy.
Yeah, and we're going to get a little bit deeper into the diagram in a little bit, but a great quote from the diagram to illustrate this principle and probably where this whole philosophy of Taravangian's is coming from, comes from, which I love, the Catechism of the Back of a Flowered Painting. And it goes, question: for what essential must we strive? Answer: the essential of preservation, to shelter a seed of humanity through the coming storm. Question: what cost must we bear? Answer: the cost is irrelevant. Mankind must survive. Our burden is that of the species, and all other considerations are but dust by comparison.
Now, there are many characters throughout different forms of literature or movies and plays that have played with this idea of extreme utilitarianism as a driving philosophy. And basically, we could probably argue that any war situation in human history is probably someone who was feeling a little too utilitarian, because they just make that argument of what must be done, anything. what is like the cost?
order
The
to
cost
achieve,
is
yeah.
irrelevant. It's just survival. It's the most kind of primal urge that we see throughout all forms of life. And just like, what does it cost? It doesn't matter. Just survive, fight. Even if, that leaves you crippled and wounded, it's just like, you have to survive. And
Yeah.
so I think what is interesting about Taravangian is how we were slowly dripped the information about him until eventually we have so much unveiled and shown in Oathbringer. And now we know that Taravangian is going to just be key moving forward. So when you are going to look back at these 5 books in the first Stormlight Archive series, we're going to have this
Slow
brilliant
build. Yeah.
burn into a character that is one of the most interesting versions of this kind of utilitarianism philosophy.
Taravangian also, he kind of has this idea that he will be the martyr essentially for humanity, that like he is committing all of these terrible acts so that, humanity can survive, that he is like taking on this burden of evil doings, let's say, for a greater purpose. And I think a good quote to illustrate this, he says, "Someone must bear the responsibility. Someone must be dragged down by it, ruined by it. Someone must stain their souls so others may live. Society offers us up to trudge through dirty waters so that others may be clean."
Now, most recently, or most famously, I think there's a little bit of Taravangian in the Marvel villain Thanos.
Totally.
I mean, this is exactly kind of Thanos's philosophy as he portrayed it in Infinity War, is that like, I'm the only one willing to make these hard decisions. And that hard decision was like resources versus population growth.
Yeah. And the idea that like there's no other option.
Yes.
Like another quote from Taravangian, he said, "Eventually you will execute someone who does not deserve it. This is the burden that society must carry in exchange for order." So like this idea that there is, no buts about it. At some point, someone who doesn't deserve it is going to die. So like, why even worry about it, essentially? Like that is a permanent eventuality.
It's part of the equation, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so Taravangian's mentality or philosophy drives him to a couple of things. And I think one of the most important is his decision to go to the Night Watcher.
Well, okay, that's interesting though, because do you think that drive caused him to go to the Night Watcher, or did all of this come after he saw the Night Watcher?
No, because I believe what he asked specifically of the Night Watcher allows us to have enough detail about his original motivations before the Night Watcher / cultivation gets involved.
I guess that's true.
So he visits the Night Watcher, and specifically what he asks for is the capacity to save humankind. And he didn't like ask for the ability to save all life on Roshar. Like it's
Right.
all very specific.
Specific to humans.
Yeah, the capacity to save humankind. And we are, of course, led to believe that the Night Watcher is the only being that he interacted with there. That's the way it's portrayed. But of course, I think what eventually happens to Taravangian, what is happening to Taravangian, we should probably think that, like Dalinar, and likely like Lift, Taravangian had a run-in with cultivation.
It's an interesting theory. I don't know if we can say for sure, but it's certainly something to think about, the possibility that, because the Night Watcher and cultivation are so shrouded in mystery, like it's not like they have a picture of what the Night Watcher looks like before they go, right? Where they would be like, oh, actually that wasn't the Night Watcher that I saw. You go, you encounter some, mystical being. Who's to say if it was really the Night Watcher, or could it have been cultivation, who is like, I think we've talked about on this podcast before, kind of building this like shadow army, like strategically placing agents of cultivation in certain places with certain powers to prepare or like help in the way that she can.
I think that the concept, of course, that cultivation has been playing in the background the entire time makes sense for cultivation, and also makes sense of like, you know, where is this other shard on Roshar while everything's going terrible? It's because like if the answer is she's like, I'm working, then I believe that kind of will all make it make sense. If it's literally just like cultivation was just like chilling in the background, just growing, what like that's
growing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's just not
just like plants.
Yeah, just like, you know, whatever. Just
her and Wendell,
yeah.
Wendell just hanging
we
out
have a
like
garden.
We're gardening. There are chairs.
I believe that what we saw of Dalinar's story is going to be mimicked with other characters. They went to go see the Night Watcher with some idea in mind. You know, Dalinar needs to be removed from that ultimate pain. Lift, still kind of question mark exactly what she asked of the Night Watcher, but had something to do with like remaining the same age mentally, or she might have thought physically, not growing old, Peter Pan type of thing going on. But we don't know the words that were used. And then I believe Taravangian goes and asks the Night Watcher, I need the capacity to save humankind. And then just like we saw with Dalinar, cultivation stepped in and was like, hey, my girl, I'm going to take this one. Like, this is a shadow piece that I need. And she stepped into that moment because what is the actual blessing or curse that we believe Taravangian has been bestowed by either the Night Watcher or cultivation?
So, yeah, it's kind of hard to parse it into those two buckets of like one blessing, one curse. I guess you could say that the blessing would be that he gets both great intelligence and great compassion. So like those are the two things that he needs to save humankind, let's say.
Yeah.
And then the curse part of it is the inverse relationship that those two qualities are given, where the smarter he is, the less compassionate he is, and the more compassionate he is, the less smart he is. So he can never really have those two things at the same time, like in balance. So he technically has the capacity to save humankind, but also not really.
He has the capacity, but not the ability to really be
good.
specific about those words. Like, he has the capacity to save humankind, but he can't do it. And this is where I think the idea of cultivation and also just the idea of Spren bonding with humans kind of comes from. What do we know about from Kaladin and Syl's relationship? The idea is that a person has to be broken a little bit so that the Spren can come in and somehow bond with their spirit web. I think cultivation has basically kind of done something like that to Taravangian, where she has given him the capacity, but in an inverse relationship, he is broken in some way. And then she can
That's interesting.
maneuver her way much like a Spren would.
Maybe.
To affect Taravangian's path. Because that inverse relationship of intelligence and compassion makes Taravangian one of the kind of most interesting and sympathetic characters, because he's not the same version of himself every time we see him. We don't know which one he's going to get.
Super interesting. Yeah.
And so there are days / paragraphs or chapters or interludes in the book where Taravangian is a pretty normal, like as normal as he feels. He is just kind of like, I'm
like
a regular
average
king.
Intelligence, average compassion.
Yeah, and on those days, like, he makes a lot of beneficial decisions for his kingdom. Like, he's allowed to rule, and like he does establish like the medical industry, and like that does have benefits, even though it's got creepy undertones. But like, he makes a lot of beneficial decisions on his just like average days, and then we flash to other days when he is completely addled, when he has no ability to speak or can
He
barely
says
form
he just
sentences.
like sits in a corner like drooling,
Yeah.
essentially.
And I mean, he describes it multiple ways, but like being entombed in his own flesh, just like sitting out or looking out through the eyes, but like incapable
Having
of
like,
doing anything.
Yeah, no comprehension.
Oh, just like devastating. Actually reminds me of the Parchment descriptions of being enslaved.
Yeah.
And that's,
I think also he talks about maybe when he is not as stupid as that, but on days when
Yes.
he has greater compassion, he just like cries all the time and is just overwhelmed by, anything horrible happening in the world, and just has this incredible like emotional response that also renders him unable to be, a just and practical king.
but of course, the days that we are probably most intrigued by, but maybe should not be most intrigued by.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah, exactly. We'll get to that in a second. But the days that are always filled with amazing things are Taravangian's genius, hyper genius, like ultimate genius level.
Well, there's only one of those days.
Of the ultimate genius level.
Yeah.
But like he has a lot of days when he is incredibly smart, and because of the inverse relationship, incredibly
Cruel.
without compassion. He is just void of compassion, void of caring about individuals or their pain.
I think the best example is in Oathbringer when he orders the entire like children's choir to just be killed.
Yeah,
He's just
'cause
like, kill them all.
they're annoying him and
Yeah.
like interrupting his thought process by singing pleasant Christmas songs.
Yeah.
But they whatever, just carols. And he, I think, has that moment. And then the one that is towards the end of Oathbringer, it's like interlude 5 or something. Just like the one where he has a very near genius day, but like...
Yeah, I think that's with the choir.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, because he also, maybe at the same time then or right after, he insults and belittles Adrotasia.
Oh, yeah.
And then he catches, like, he has a moment of almost catching himself.
Yeah.
Where he's like, did I just insult?
Yeah, like my oldest and dearest friend in the entire world.
But then he pushes past it. And
Yeah.
they just, like, ignores it because of the, the lack
he has
of
more
compassion.
important things to think about.
But that was interesting that, like, what he didn't stop on was murdering or ordering the death of a bunch of children. But he did catch himself a little bit, or at least like it sparked
noticed
something. When he insulted his oldest and most trusted friend. So I think that is like that there's a tiny hint of compassion left on that day.
Yeah.
But then that means that on the ultimate genius day, whatever we want to call it, Mr. T's big day, he has a ability that is so grand and so powerful that he was able to write the diagram.
Yeah. And then here's where we get into like some really interesting stuff, because we know that cultivation of all of the shards has the most insight, or like the most long-term view or ability to like see into the future and see future possibilities. And so this ability of Taravangians to sort of channel that is very interesting, and kind of brings us back to that question of, did he really see the Night Watcher, or is he somehow channeling some power of cultivations?
User Bonley on Reddit said this, quote, "Both are blessings and both are curses. I'm pretty sure the blessing is that he has the capacity to save humanity, whether it's via intelligence or compassion, but also the capacity to doom humanity via the exact same gift," end quote. And I think that kind of is getting at exactly what you're saying, is like, we're not really sure about all the specifics, but that's why it makes me feel like it's more of a cultivation type thing, because she is playing the cards closer to her chest. And
although, okay, but like going off of that quote, would cultivation take that risk of potentially dooming humanity,
Yes, because
if it is both. Although I guess cultivation probably only cares about defeating Odium.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
like in the Cosmere,
Yeah.
Scale of things, it doesn't really matter what happens on Roshar as long as Odium is defeated.
So think of it like this. We have had another character, Vasher, who won a fight not by being the best combatant in his own words but by using a trick where he got incredibly close, made himself vulnerable to a better swordsman, and yet when he was close, he didn't try to fight with swords. He instead used the trick of passing his breath and overwhelming his opponent in one sudden burst, or like our good friend Hoyd says, waiting as the boulder rolls down the hill.
Yeah, and then
so
giving it a well-timed push.
Exactly. And that even if that push doesn't move the boulder a lot, it slightly redirects the course. That's Cultivation's move, in my opinion. So she has this, we'll call it future sight. That's not the correct term or like the Brandon term, but it's described by a couple of characters in a really interesting way. And I think it's the possible to be shown that what Taravangian was able to do on this day is basically understand a little bit better than some of the other characters that we've seen in the Cosmere, like Kelsier, or even like the Lord Ruler, who were slivers of infinity and had all the power of Ashard to see the infinite possibilities of the future. Everyone else, Kelsier and the Lord Ruler, they made some changes, but mainly they just got kind of overwhelmed. And Taravangian, because of the hyperintelligence, was able to channel that into the diagram. Mm-hmm. And so basically the diagram is what the shards have more infinite access to. And we see this at the end of Oathbringer. When Odium sees it, he immediately sees it and sees all the connections and is like, you did this without access to the spiritual realm? This is badass, Taravangian. He's a little impressed, but he also can see right past what Taravangian wrote into the infinite Cosmere as well. But Cultivation can do it better.
Okay, and here we get into the diagram. But I also wonder if the blessing curse kind of thing also comes in with the diagram. Clearly, Taravangian believes that the diagram is what is going to help him save humanity. But what if it's the opposite? Because he gets so focused on what the diagram says. I wonder, and I think we've already kind of seen that is actually leading him further away from his goal.
Do you mean to say that the moving further away from the goal of saving humanity is he's trying to...
Yeah, I think in the end, he is going to fail at whatever he's trying to do. And he's going to look back and he's going to see that it's because he was so focused on the outcome of this one intelligent day. And we see in Oathbringer that they keep going back to this text. It's written in a language that he made up that day. We know that it's been translated multiple times.
By multiple people, including Taravangian and Adortasia and other members of the diagram committee.
Yeah, and so because they're translating it and it's fragmented and everyone's trying to interpret it and figure out what it means, that it is causing problems. And that's actually why they are trying to get the death rattles, because they're trying to get more information to add to the diagram to update it. Because in the end, it doesn't matter if you can see into the future in one moment, because the next moment the future has changed, right? Each moment the future is becoming different. So because he's hyper focused on this one moment in time when he was able to see things, I think he is kind of blinding himself to anything that may be happening in the present that may be changing that would affect the actions that he's taking.
And this kind of brings me back to what the user said from Reddit. The concept that he has this capacity to doom humankind, I think is because of, like you said, that hyper focus on the single day and maybe an ignorance or not an appreciation of just being a good king on your good enough days.
Yeah, and just like focusing on what's happening right now, and doing what he can to help right now, rather than basing everything that he does on this document that's now years and years old.
We also know that a recurring quote from multiple different people is, you cannot trust anyone who says they can predict the future.
Yup.
And it's in situations that maybe is not directly in Taravangian's chapters or pages. It's been said to Renarin and other characters, and we just kind of can maybe hint and remember that we believe one of the Unmade is filtering / manipulating the powers that are connected to future sight across all of Roshar.
Although Taravangian might be the exception to that because of what Odium says about Taravangian creating the diagram without access to fortune. So maybe he's actually outside.
Fortune, then
exactly. Maybe we should trust Taravangian.
And that's always the question. But I think basically if we have cultivation who's making this play, because we have to see like what day happened and then, or what Taravangian was like on that day happened, and then the outcomes of that day and the decision. So like on his super smart, ultra genius day, he creates the diagram, and then he makes all of these decisions that we know are leading him to make the ultimate deal with Odium at the end, because there is, not only is the diagram being translated multiple times, not only is it being updated, not only are people in the diagram committee disagreeing about the updates and the translations and like what it means and the interpretation. Like we have the entire, we'll talk about this later, but Graves is a member who leaves the diagram to just go do other things, and that's where he runs into our good friend Moash. Curse at Moash. But we're keeping it family friendly. The diagram is being updated all the time, and it happened after Taravangian's like super great day, but then...
And he says that too. He says that he created the diagram on his smartest day, but he's never been smart enough to interpret it again. So like there's a lot that he is potentially losing in the interpretation because he's not smart enough to understand it.
And then he has a very dumb day, very poor day, when he is visited by Odium. And that's when he makes the deal.
I think, doesn't he? It's not like his dumbest day. He just says he's like below average intelligence.
It's not.
It's like not horrible.
Ultimate dumb, yeah. But it's also not good. It's not in a position.
I mean, he's certainly not as smart as he wishes he was to deal with Odium.
I mean, I think it's a fairly bad day, like on the scale of it, because Odium comes in and is telling Taravangian this meeting was never going to happen when you had any ability to meet me on it.
He also says that he like was trying to be fair, and he picked a day that he was not a complete idiot. He could have picked a day when Taravangian was like drooling, and he didn't. Taravangian's just less than average intelligence.
I think we're just disagreeing about like matters of degrees, but let's just go to the way that Odium says it. Quote, "Now," Odium said, lightly resting a scepter on Taravangian's shoulder, "do you think I will ever meet with you when you are feeling well? Do you not realize that I chose this day specifically because of your ailment, Taravangian? Do you really think you will ever be able to negotiate with me from a position of power?" End quote. Odium is not messing around with Taravangian. He is specifically pointing out that Odium, is in a position of power. Taravangian is not. It's not being fair. I mean, he says that he is being fair. I am just contradicting what he says is like, that's not fair. That's like an abusive person being like always like picking on their spouse type of thing. It's a
power differential.
Yes, a power differential.
I mean, clearly.
And he's like accentuating the power differential, and he chooses that day. And in my opinion, we have to believe that cultivation knew that both of those things were going to happen. That Taravangian was going to have his big genius day, and he was going to have the day when he makes the deal with Odium, and that he's supposed to be the level that he's at on both those days, so that all the other events that can happen afterwards. So basically, Taravangian has his diagram day, and then all the events of Way of Kings, including like Gavilar's death and like all of the events that we see up to Oathbringer, happen because of that diagram day. And then the deal with Odium happens, and now everything after. I feel like we're in two different chunks of the story. And the dividing
Pre-Odium,
point...
post-Odium.
Yeah, and the dividing point is pre-deal with Odium, Taravangian's deal. So it's just like Taravangian made a decision on his super smart day, and we have all of these stories so far, and now he's made another decision on a less than great day. And we're going to have the consequences of that decision going forward in these next couple of stories.
Doesn't he say that he always knew he was like going to have to make a deal with Odium?
I believe that is correct, that it was part of the diagram or part of his realization from the diagram, is that this was all kind of pointing in one direction.
Mm-hmm. So then we should talk about what he and Odium actually agree to, which is very interesting. And I think there's already been a lot of speculation on the internet about what this could mean. Taravangian agrees to help Odium by showing him the diagram, and he gives him an honor blade as well. And what Taravangian gets in exchange is that Odium will spare the people of Kharbranth when he like destroys all of humanity. So everyone else is like gonna die, but the people in Kharbranth, I think and their spouses will be spared.
Which overall seems like a pretty lame deal. But remember what we said back in the beginning.
Lame.
Like, Taravangian is an ultimate utilitarian. He feels like he got boxed into this corner on his not greatest day, but just by like situation and circumstance, this is the best thing that he can get. Well, and that's all he's working for, is like the best result he can possibly hope to achieve, and this is what he thinks is the best result, so that's what he's going to go with.
And like we said at the beginning, he's not looking to save all of humanity in the sense that he wants to save every person that currently resides on Roshar. He wants to save a seed of humanity so that the species will continue.
And
which
so
he
this
gets
deal,
out
yeah,
of,
exactly.
yeah.
Like this deal
as long
gets
as
him
one
to his
city
goal.
survives.
Yeah, it's just lame, but it's like overall it's a terrible deal for humanity, because let's be honest, if we had like all of Earth and you made a deal to pick a city wherever you are, whether that is New York City or the middle of nowhere, like it doesn't matter, just pick that city and be like, that's the one that survives. That's not as interesting anymore. You know, that's like humanity does survive. Like technically Taravangian gets what he wants, but overall you lost humanity and you just saved a couple of these like, you know, monkeys without hair. I mean, that's like, it's, you don't have humanity anymore. You don't have society. You don't have the internet, you don't have spaceships, you don't have anything that is like cool music or worthwhile.
You're still starting over from scratch.
Yeah, and it's just like I get the idea of just like, this is the best deal that he could make, but I also don't need to be happy with it. Like it's a lame deal, Taravangian. Go the Dalinar way is my obviously.
It does seem like a letdown where you're like, really, dude, you're gonna take that deal?
But of course, I don't think he is. I think that...
Oh, you think he's going to double-cross Odium?
I think that Taravangian... I
don't think that's possible.
No, I don't... Okay, so I don't think he's doing it on purpose or even doing it consciously. But I think Taravangian is the cultivation shadow piece, if that's what we want to call them, that is like an unwitting or unknowing double agent, that she has sent Taravangian like a Trojan horse into Odium's grasp, into his camp, now into his inner circle, where Odium is making deals with Taravangian because, get this, all that time where they had translated and spent years and years and years and killed people and all this terrible stuff about the diagram, they didn't even have the whole one. Just hidden behind a little baseboard or something, unbeknownst to them, unseen because of Cultivation's work, there was a quote that Taravangian uses to convince Odium to make this deal when he is not at his best. Like, he doesn't have the ability to speak to Odium. He literally looks at the wall and was like, oh, look, there's something we've never seen before. Glowing in golden letters as if beaming from the spiritual realm. You have these words that all Taravangian has to do is read, and by reading those words, he convinces Odium to make this deal. So in my mind, this is the deception that Cultivation has put forward, is that Taravangian is a Trojan horse of sorts.
Or is that secret message from Odium?
Oh, but then it's used to trick Odium. Why would Odium, like, not know the trick?
Because it's not actually a trick.
It's just, like, Odium kind of manipulated or put forward those words instead of Cultivation. And so, like, Taravangian thinks he's doing the right thing. He's like, oh my god, I've found these words. And Odium's really just like, no,
that's exactly what I wanted you to say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then he takes the deal because that's what he wanted.
Exactly.
I mean, that would be an super awesome deception move by Odium, or it's a super awesome deception move by Cultivation. Which shard do you come down with here?
So the quote that he reads in this moment of realization is, quote, "You have agreed to a battle of champions. You must withdraw to prevent this contest from occurring, and so must not meet with Dalinar Kholin again. Otherwise, he can force you to fight. This means you must let your agents do your work. You need me." End quote.
Which is, to me, sounds like a power move.
I mean, it does seem to be true, but...
Yeah, a lot of things seem to be true, and then Brandon messes with us hardcore. So, like, plus, I respect your healthy cynicism, plus we have a podcast to keep up and need to be disagreeing on some things.
Plus, like, if he didn't read those words... would Taravangian have committed himself to being on Odium's team?
I don't know.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course.
Like, it just seems suspicious that this particular quote gives Odium an agent to work for him. Like, so convenient. You know what I mean?
So I think that's really just like, where do you come down on, is this the work of Odium to get what he wants and he's manipulating Taravangian? Or is it the work of Cultivation who's manipulating Taravangian to get what she wants?
I mean, because I guess to play devil's advocate to my own theory.
I thought I was doing a good job, but you can also play it yourself.
There are so many options. I guess it doesn't really make sense if you think that Odium specifically comes to Taravangian because he can't see the diagram by himself. So if he can't even see it, how would he change it? Plus, part of the diagram, the part that talks about Renarin, is still hidden from him. So I guess then it doesn't really make sense that he would be like hacking the diagram to get Taravangian to do something.
I suppose there is the possibility that it's the work of the unmade Molak, who, you know, can adjust or somehow filter, somehow, like we talked about earlier, manipulate future sight or foresight.
Well, he grants future sight. And then we just speculate that because everyone is so wary of future sight that there may be something either corrupting that power, or Molak himself is not maybe giving the whole picture when he does grant future sight.
I obviously have no idea. Brandon, hit us up in the comments if you would like.
Brandon, just tell us everything.
You can find us at Cosmere Conversation on Twitter or Reddit or Facebook. We're everywhere. The interesting thing is, I think there has got to be some ultimate motivation for the fear around foresight.
100.
And the diagram and Taravangian's role, and like, how is he the shadow piece of Cultivation, as we've been talking about, or is there something else going on? But I believe like all those things are connected and will be something we see of and see the future of in the next couple of books.
To go back to the faults kind of the diagram. There are different groups that have at one point been a part of like the main diagram group and then have disagreed about certain interpretations that are being taken of the text and have broken away with like their own creed, essentially. Kind of like the breaking up of Christianity, where people were like, nah, I don't think that's how it is. We're going to go do our thing over here. And Taravangian actually says that he's like cool with that. He's like, all right, I mean, as long as one of us is correct, like it's all good. But he thinks he's correct, obviously.
And I think it's also something that's mentioned in the diagram, and that's why he's cool with it.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Groups will break off.
Yeah.
And he's just, then that's all, it's very short, or like, you know, just a single passage, but he's just like, okay.
Yeah. And one of those groups is led by Graves, who we meet as an Alethi shard bearer. And his different interpretation is that rather than killing Dalinar, they need to ally themselves with Dalinar to make him the king of Alethkar, which obviously leads them to try to assassinate Elhokar.
And so we have this Graves subplot or subdivision of the diagram, but this comes up, and this might not be something everybody realizes, but like Graves is the one that recruits Moash and tries to recruit Kaladin in the Elhokar assassination. He's from the diagram, and I don't know if he ever spells it out. It's mentioned in a flashback of Taravangians, or like it's connected through Taravangian that Graves is the person who left.
Yeah.
But then you have to make that connection on your own. So if you never made that connection, this is just BT dubs. Like, Graves is of the diagram, and he is the one who tries to have Elhokar assassinated so that Dalinar can ascend to the king of Alethkar, which is kind of the position he's in by Oathbringer. Mm-hmm. And that's also the position that Taravangian now comes to agree with, because he's like, okay, if Dalinar is the king of Alethkar and I'm the king of Yakaved, then Dalinar goes and I can rise to that power now. So like basically he went from we should assassinate Dalinar and now is like, well.
But he spends all of Oathbringer trying to undermine Dalinar's authority.
Because he is already in the position of power as High King.
He is still trying to get rid of Dalinar because he believes that Taravangian needs to be in charge and not Dalinar.
Because Dalinar is the High King at that point, or at least is in all but actual name, and that is the position that Taravangian ultimately wants. He wants to become king of everything, right?
Yeah.
That's what the diagram puts forward.
Yeah.
And so he made his move to become king of Yakaved. Nice work, Taravangian. But he's also now admitting that the diagram was wrong and that basically Graves was right. He doesn't say that, but this is the conclusion that he came to, because
I don't remember that.
It's the idea that has to be true because of his actions. Dalinar is the High King. That's what Graves wanted to happen, to be king of Elethkar.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, that's like, I'm just trying to like make those key connection points.
He now thinks that was the correct interpretation because it happened. Oh my gosh, there's so much like stupid logic around this diagram.
He just twists it, right?
Yeah.
He just like, oh, that was.
Well, the diagram has to be right.
Yes.
So the events that happened must be what the diagram was saying.
And that's what I'm trying to say. He is always just twisting his own logic. It's not that Taravangian comes out and says, oh, Graves was right. He says, I was always right, and this is the way it was always going to be, because the diagram is always
too stupid
right.
to realize
exactly. And so like this is the fun / terrible aspect of the diagram, but it sends your mind into loops and reels, and you just go over and over different things, and you're like, oh my god, if he's right that he was too dumb to figure out that Dalinar was actually supposed to do this, then Graves was actually right, and he actually should have done the thing back. You go down this rabbit hole of complete craziness.
It's just like the most intense form of confirmation bias.
Oh, that's a great way to say it. Like Taravangian, we've talked about how other characters have like alcoholism or post-traumatic stress disorder or multiple personality, and Taravangian
has intense confirmation bias.
I think that Graves is a great example of how much we don't know about the diagram.
And just like the fallibility of the diagram.
Yeah, 100%. So the most interesting thing now is, of course, this is still being connected back, looped back in. The diagram always just be looping, because Graves recruits Moash, who fails to recruit Kaladin, and in return, Kaladin swears his third ideal, leveling up at the end of Words of Radiance. Moash becomes a slave. Graves dies. The deal that Taravangian makes with Odium at the end of Oathbringer includes giving Odium Yezerin's Honor Blade. And then, Brooke, what does Odium then go do with that Honor Blade?
Gives it to the Fused, who give it to Moash.
So now Moash, who we could say is the heir apparent to Graves' subdivision of the diagram committee, the Moash now has the full power of a Honor Blade and is basically working for Odium / the Fused.
Yeah.
Was that part of the diagram, T? I don't know.
Yeah, you tell me, man.
But we have all of these different connections. And I think when we start to break down the actual words of the diagram, we're going to find even more little hints and messages about maybe this plot, maybe other plots around the Cosmere.
Very clear how easy it is to like interpret these things in a bunch of different ways.
Let's dive into some of those other quotes from the diagram. Let's go first to the West Wall Psalm of Wonders.
I love the titles that they give these.
They're the best.
They're so good.
This is paragraph 8 in the West Wall Psalm of Wonders. But I think is important to keep in mind what we just said about connections to the larger Cosmere plot. And
variations in interpretation.
Quote, "But who is the wanderer, the wild piece, the one who makes no sense? I glimpse at his implications, and the world opens to me. I shy back. Impossible. Is it?" End quote. Note by Adortasia. Could this refer to Mraize? So, Brooke, what did you mean by misinterpretation or open to interpretation?
Well, I think clearly, as we all know here, us world singers, this obviously is referring to Wit.
And yet, Adortasia believes that it is someone that she may recognize as important and a world hopper, or, you know, something weird about Mraize.
Right.
Where it's just like he's giving off that vibe.
But it's just like that's the only thing that she can comprehend because it's the only thing that she's had contact with.
Exactly. The
and
only
yet,
perspective she can imagine is
yes!
Mraize.
But we know as outsiders and amazing world hoppers that, I mean, I guess we don't know, but I think we can basically say that this is Hoid.
Because the Wanderer, he has also been referred to as the Traveler. That sounds pretty close.
Exactly. And like, of anyone, the perfect description for Hoid is the one who makes no sense.
Exactly. I mean, he is the one who makes no sense. I mean, we've talked about this in our Hoid episodes, but we've even flirted with the possibility or the theory that Hoid is a character that breaks the fourth wall and kind of exists in a meta...
I think that actually is completely true because of something I read that Brandon said about Hoid recently.
There is maybe one day we'll do like a 5th episode just on Hoid, but just to update the information that we get all the time, you know, our past episodes are slightly out of date and speculation can now be turned into fact.
Like a whole episode on like best words of Brandon or something?
Yes, we should.
Okay.
So we have the idea of one, and what sinks it for me, that it's Hoid, is when Taravangian, the author of this Westwall Psalm of Wonders, paragraph 8, is him saying, I glimpse at his implications. Now, if we think Hoid's implications, and the world opens to me, I shy back. Impossible. Like, Hoyd
Yeah.
is the one that is so interconnected in the Cosmere that even glimpsing at his
Like implications of his existence.
yes, like breaks everything. It's just
basically.
I mean, this is someone who he's in the midst of writing the diagram when he writes this paragraph. So this is someone who is not shying back from like a mental download of the spiritual realm, just like tapping into not fortune, but like future sight and seeing as we think cultivation does, and able to translate that. And yet then he looks at Hoyd in this way and it makes him shy back and pull away just from the possibility.
Because I think too here, we suspect that Hoyd is moving through time in some way, in addition to moving through space, in addition to moving through the cognitive realm. So he is like sort of metaphysically tied up in all of these really complicated, convoluted, intense things that, yeah, if you were to like look at that kind of web of Hoyd's existence, it would be brain breaking.
Even for Taravangian on his best day.
Exactly.
So that is the thing. I don't think Mraize breaks genius Taravangian's brain.
Yeah.
It's just like, that's a world hopper. We get it. Hoyd breaks all of our brains. So that makes sense. Love that quote. It was a little bit reminding me of the kind of metaphysical existence of Hoyd and just like, oh man, he's everywhere.
Yeah. The next quote that we have is a long string of numbers that the diagram is able to translate into a sentence or sentences that say, quote, "Hold the secret that broke the Knights Radiant. You may need it to destroy the new orders when they return." End quote. So we know that he uses this knowledge in Oathbringer, but I think that it's a great reminder that this particular faction, the diagram, is interested in destroying the Knights Radiant.
Their goals are not aligned. They are opposed, and for whatever reason, Taravangian creating the diagram felt that the Knights Radiant were detrimental to humanity's survival. Now, either A, that could be because Knights Radiant summon the...
Yeah, I think, and this is where it gets a little bit complicated, I think, in Oathbringer, is that we start to discover all of these different factions, and they all have like slightly different views on history and current events. So, you know, the diagram thinks that if the Knights Radiant come back, then that will bring the Voidbringers back. But the group that, is it Amaram?
I believe so.
Is working for, they want to bring the Voidbringers back because they believe that if the Voidbringers come back, then the Knights Radiant will come back and the Heralds will come back, and like everything will be great.
It's like a chicken or egg scenario type thing.
Exactly.
Which is, you know, just exactly what we found out with the existence of humans on Roshar. It's like we keep diving further back into their history until eventually you realize, oh wait, they were a species.
Here first.
Yeah, a species coming from another world as like refugees. So they had some type of either, you know, odium inspired shard power to allow them to travel, or, you know, I don't hate the idea of they already were a kind of spacefaring civilization and fell backwards into development when they came to Roshar. That's just throwing that out there.
Yeah, I would love that if they were like a super advanced civilization that then encountered some kind of terrible event, fled their planet, and then like were reduced to picking up the pieces. I guess kind of like they are now in theory, like we were talking about Taravangian's Carbronth like being the new seed of humanity. Oh my gosh, it's like Inception.
Yeah, it's a seed within a seed.
Seed inside a seed.
Very fractal nature of the existence going on here in the Cosmere. I think that another quote that I love is from Floorboard 17. Quote, "Ah, but they were left behind. It is obvious from the nature of the bond. But where? Set off. Obvious. Realization like apricity. They are with the Shin. We must find one. To use a truthless, can we craft a weapon? End quote. So the setup, of course, as I mentioned earlier, but to not only use a truthless, but also maybe influence the creation of the truthless. And so the diagram sets up the creation, possibly, or at least the use of Szeth as the assassin in white, giving us the entire plot since Gavilar's death.
Well, and it's speculated that this is about the honor blades. I think that's a pretty like broad theory, broadly accepted theory. So I wonder if there is something in this that Taravangian is like trying to get all of the honor blades in some way out of this. Because I think I also read that Szeth receives an honor blade like when he leaves as a truthless, and that is a unusual thing to happen to a truthless, but something about the circumstances under which he was declared truthless and like his former place in Shin society, they kind of made this concession in giving him the honor blade. So that makes me wonder if Taravangian had something to do with that concession. Exactly. Nice. To create this weapon.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, obviously the honor blades themselves are weapons, but the power to wield an honor blade, as Szeth taught Lift at the end of Oathbringer, you have the gift, but none of the skill. I have more skill as a edge dancer because I've used the blade that made me an edge dancer. And we
trained and like practiced a long time.
And so Szeth is not only like could Taravangian get the weapon itself, but get the means to use that weapon.
I don't think when it says, can we craft a weapon, I don't think it's talking about the honor blades. I think the weapon is Szeth. Next quote is also super interesting. And this is, I believe, also on floorboard 17. It's a good floorboard, that one.
Really, really doing well on that floorboard. He was in a good flow state.
Quote, there has to be an answer. What is the answer? Stop. The Parshendi. One of them. Yes, they are the missing piece. Push for the Alethi to destroy them outright before this one obtains their power. It will form a bridge. End quote.
Now, bridges having a tiny bit of significance in the Stormlight Archive seems to jump out. Now, we have... What's the answer? So he's asking a question, and then his answer is the Parshendi. Do we assume this is Eshonai who summons the evil Spren, the Spren of Odium and the Storm?
I kind of think...
Or...
Well, no, you say.
Is it her sister?
Yeah, Venli?
Is it Venli who is responsible for the actual discovery of the Stormspren, and is of course still alive to have more at play, and we believe.
But she repents.
Exactly, she doesn't.
But maybe this is talking about Venli.
Yes,
bonding a Spren.
That's what I think.
The little Spren that she bonds.
That's what I think. I don't think the bridge is.
It's about trying to keep the Parshendi from the Spren, not the fused coming back.
Yeah, I don't think it's so much a idea of like the bridge. Maybe it could be saying that because it says push for the Alethi to destroy them outright, and that is like clearly what Sadius did, pushing Dalinar further and further to destroy them outright.
Or but maybe it's just talking about what we already know, which is that they say these words of power, and then there's like a bridge that is made that brings the fused back. You know,
it could be
maybe this is actually already
that's where
done.
I was leading
we can
to.
Just like cross it off.
Yeah, and
100%. That's boring.
Exactly.
Darn it! No, we already got this one.
But no, I like the idea that it's not. I think that's the simple answer. That's like one way to read it, and it could be correct because it will form a bridge. It brings the fused across. Yeah. Okay, so that makes sense.
Like we're up to date.
Yeah, exactly. However, I feel like it also could be, and the idea of forming a bridge, not in a bad way, but in a good way. And that is Venli bonding with her. Is it a light Spren that we believe she's bonded to?
Yeah. Okay, something that I just realized or thought about is that by the end of Oathbringer, we have Venli, who has bonded a spren, or like, you know, is using what we typically think of as human magic.
The power of the radiance.
Yeah. And then we have Moash, who is a human who has bonded like Voidbringer Parshendi magic. So these two characters are like blending these two different groups that we have thought of as separate and in their own way. Like they're each sort of a bridge in between worlds-ish.
Well, and I think that there is, at least, you saying that got me really excited, because who started as like the bridgeman?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was like. I wanted this quote to like be part of the bridgemen, because when I read it, I was just like, bridge. Like you always hear it in connection to the bridgemen. And so I felt like it was like a dog whistle to my brain.
And that's what we are seeing with Kaladin's story too, is that he is struggling under the realization that these things aren't that separate.
Yeah.
That all these people are connected and that they're all people he should be trying to save. And that's the struggle he's having. And so as former bridgeman, and Moash as former bridgeman, I like the idea that, you know.
Yeah. The like dissolution of easy dividing lines.
If that's not a way to end, I don't know what is. What do you guys think out in the interwebs? Do you think that this is talking about a fact that we kind of already know, just the summoning of the Voidbringers?
Or a new thing to come?
You can follow us and find us on Reddit or Facebook or Twitter or anywhere we exist in the universe.
Until next time, life before death.
Strength before weakness.
Journey before destination.